Welcome back to Your Story Medicine. Today I am with Maylys Tao, who is LA's self-proclaimed donut princess and is the owner of DK's Donuts and Bakery in Santa Monica, California, as well as Donut Princess Los Angeles, which is a donut bouquet delivery concept. She is also the host of her own podcast called Short and Sweet. And you can find her securing the bag at Donut Princess LA, as well as her other multiple social media platforms she manages. Welcome, Maylee.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, so many of you might be wondering, what direction is June going? Bringing somebody to come on this podcast to talk about donuts? Well, we're going to expand more into that because I have a feeling after you listen to this, you are going to have such a deep reverence for donuts, especially in California, because do we have some stories to you today? So, Maylee, in your own words, how is it that you would describe your medicine?
I would describe my medicine as obviously food. Okay, food, especially how I was raised, is medicine. It is kind of like your lifeline, you know? Food is definitely where I find my medicine. I also find my medicine in being active, and also really discovering what my medicine was in the past few years, and being mistaken for what my medicine could be. So in my younger years, I would say that, you know, substances would be where my medicine was. And in the last few years, I've really started to develop this awareness for what you put into your body. That obviously goes for physical things, right? So food and being active. But it also goes into medicine of like snapping back into this like big dick energy. And when I talk about the big dick energy, it's really the environment that you surround yourself in. So my
Wait, can we spell that?
well, just BDE is the like just the initials, just in case people are G-rated here. I have a little sister, so it's really hard for me to like cuss and stuff like online because I'm like, what if she sees this? It's not okay. Um,
Oh my gosh, we talk about all the things here. So
yeah.
please do not feel like you need to censor yourself. Continue. I just want to make sure that everyone heard that correctly.
Yes. So, yeah, as I was saying, like your environment is also your medicine. So that includes like having a clean, welcoming space to come home to. It also means surrounding yourself with people who really nourish that BDE, who see you as this big form, this big light, this big person, and consistently support you in doing so. Um, my medicine is, I guess, a few things all put together, and it really helps me thrive.
Yes. So, first of all, I just want to thank your openness to describing the evolution of what you have seen as medicine, because I don't think we talk about how in a lot of our communities, when pharmaceutical medicine is not as accessible or when it's taboo, that we will medicate in other ways. And so that's been a common theme I have found for a lot of my guests. It's like prior to us stepping into our role as quote unquote healers or entrepreneurs, which really I have found has been the most spiritual path that I have been able to say yes to. The overlapping narrative is how we have found ways to, well, we say medicate ourselves, but really it is just numbing ourselves from
Mhm.
being able to feel. And so both you and I have an overlap with our ancestral heritage, but yeah, let's hear more about your own ancestral lineage and how this has influenced your path today.
Okay. Well, my nationality is Chinese, Cambodian, Thai. And specifically, the type of Chinese I am is Dichu or Chichao. Now, if you guys are listening out there and have never heard of it, it's okay because not a lot of people have. But if you have, you will know that there's a huge diaspora in the southern part of China that caused all these Chichao people to flee their homeland. My great grandparents were one of them. So during this whole diaspora, Chichao people are found in Thailand, they're found in Switzerland, they're found in Cambodia, and they're found in Vietnam and other parts of the world. But my ancestors, they some went to Thailand, and I have a bunch of family in Thailand, literally from the north to the south. But my grandparents, they actually came to Cambodia in hopes of searching for new opportunity. So, you know, speaking Chichao language, it's I call it like a secret language because no, like it's very rare that you will ever meet anybody who is also Chichao. But my grandparents, when they were in Cambodia, they actually were thriving in business. One of them had like a soy sauce factory, and then the other one had like, I don't know, some kind of like materials company. And so, they were actually very wealthy until the Khmer Rouge happened, which, if you don't know what the Khmer Rouge is, it's a huge genocide that happened in Cambodia that essentially killed many millions of Chinese Cambodians. And these people were forced to flee the cities into the jungle to work for the government for free, and was really put under so much of this communist rule, and it really took away the childhood of my parents. So my parents, they were very young at the time. My mom was 11 when this was happening, and she is the daughter. She has seven siblings, and back in the day, that's cool to have. And my dad, same, he also had two brothers, and they managed to basically escape. My parents, they found refuge at one of the refugee camps, actually in the south of Thailand, and they basically fled from where they were with their families by foot to go to these refugee camps, where they eventually were able to get to the Red Cross, and they were able to grant them this new life in America. And so, when my mom settled here with her whole family, it was like in Chinatown, which was not the greatest neighborhood. She told me that she would work for pennies. Literally, she would work for a seamstress, and she would get paid a penny per article of clothing. And, she tells me about times where she walked up hills with like no shoes on, where she really just saved with her family, and toiled to bring together money to basically for a donut shop. This cues in my dad's side of the family, which I would call is donut royalty. My great uncle Ted, who is the star of the Donut King film, he actually sponsored hundreds of people, Cambodian people, to come over to America, and also created a system where he set them up with donut shops. So you know how like Vietnamese people have nail shops? Well, like donut shops are what Cambodians have. And one day my mom says she was, working at this donut shop, I think in Lake Paris. And my dad walks in with my Uncle Ted. And my Uncle Ted is basically the matchmaker for my parents. And within 5 minutes, they go visit my grandpa, my mom's dad, and asks for her hand in marriage. And they are arranged, and they were married for 20 years. 1989 is when I was born here in Los Angeles. And, I spent a lot of my time in the donut shop, which is now, DK's Donuts and Bakery, almost 40 years in operation. So my first memories of being in the donut shop is like being really, really tiny, running around, shoving donut holes in my mouth, and getting teased and pinched by the workers that we have there, which I also call, my family. And I spent a lot of my childhood there, helping my parents. My parents, they did not get the opportunity to receive an education. So my mom was always trying to send me and my brother to the best schools. And, I went to St. Monica's for private Catholic high school education. And then I went to UCSD, where it was also like rated, the best, one of the best universities in the world. And I studied communications, and I came here back to DK's, and I wanted to rebrand the entire store. And there has been so much that has happened ever since then. I've like created some amazing concepts like the ube donut, the half croissant, half donut. We were the first ones in LA to do that, the waffle donut, and really just created a community on social media where people, get to follow our journey together as a family, our journey with donuts. And now with the documentary being out, it is also another way that, our story is continued to being told.
Yes, actually, that's how I first came across Maylys. It's when I watched the Donut King documentary, which was screened at the Cambodian Town Film Festival, which was actually founded by a mutual friend of ours, Kaylee. Because if you know the history of, or if you don't know the history of what happened during the Khmer Rouge, the very first people to get exterminated were actually the artists. They were the
Mhm.
creatives who inspired people to envision what an alternative can look like. And then it was those who were educated, even if you had glasses, you would go. And so hearing the the story of how people took this tragedy and have, at least those who survived and who came to the United States, or all parts of the world, but I know at least for us, Long Beach and Los Angeles is where there's the largest population outside of Cambodia. It's just, I have such, again, deep reverence now every time I go to a donut shop. And ever since seeing the documentary and knowing the story of how this donut empire has expanded because of so much of that trauma, it's just like, wow. And then to meet people like you who could have created a different pathway. You went to school, you got your degree, and I'm just curious, did your parents want you to take over the shop, or were they like, hey, you can do something completely different. We don't want you to work as hard as us. What was their reaction to your choice of coming back to this?
Yeah, so I would say that mutually they wanted it to be in like my back pocket. They actually encouraged me to do something else because it's a lot of hard work. But what I couldn't really escape is coming home and seeing them work so hard. I wanted to take the burden on. I didn't want to see them work hard anymore. So I wanted to make it easier for them by implementing, technology and putting myself in the front lines instead of them. And I mean, DK's just like blew up. It was crazy. Like it was really insane. I didn't know that I had that much power to do that. But, when you get up at 4 a.m., like I was getting up at 4 a.m. and working so many hours every day. When you get up that early, all I could think about was like, this is for my mom. This is for my dad. Like, I'm going to do this because I want to. And that actually fueled a lot of the inspiration and the drive that I had when I had first stepped into DK's and took it over.
Hmm. What does DK stand for?
So DK's used to be a chain back in the 80s, and it stands for David and Kathy. But, sometimes we repurpose it like, obviously Donut King, Donkey Kong, Drift King. So it really just depends on what you want, it's, but DK's has become like a household family name for sure.
So deep. I'm totally kidding. Actually, there's a Thai pizza spot in Long Beach called Dean's curry pizza, but when I spoke to the owners, their logo is actually of like this Italian man with a mustache. I'm like, oh, that's a very really interesting choice. What made you choose that? And they're like, we didn't have money to change the name or the logo or the sign, and so we just added curry, and now that's what they're known for.
Yeah, so my parents, I asked them, like, so when I was younger, like, why don't we change the name of DK? They're like, no, 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 no. Like DK is like lucky, just leave it. Just leave it as is. So when we were getting really popular and generating a lot of press, people would get us confused with the other locations that exist in SoCal. And I was like, well, you guys, we should have changed the name. But DK, it's kind of easy to digest, right? DK's, like, let's go to DK's. It's not some like long, crazy name. Like, it's just simple. It's DK's.
Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me the most in the documentary, which by the way is produced by Ridley Scott, the same dude who did Gladiator, Aliens, and all these other sci-fi films, which,
Mhm.
side note, it was totally random for me to see that he chose to produce this, but now I get why because of how epic it is.
Yeah.
But one of the things that stood out to me was when I heard the backstory of how a lot of Cambodians would work for minimum wage at Winchell's.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, okay, if Winchell's needs $50,000 a month to survive as a franchise, we can make do with $10,000.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it just speaks to the resourcefulness of our people and how so many of these businesses, we have this misconception that, oh, people who own businesses exploit others and are just in it for profit. But then when we hear stories like your family or immigrants who I feel, are the backbone of this country, especially as small businesses, it's like, wow, imagine how different our economy would be if we had more people who, not just immigrants, but I say children of immigrants, who can also tap into those resources that are within us. It's in our lineage. And so that's why so much of this podcast was birthed from hopefully inspiring others to know that they can carve out their own path.
Yeah. And I would love to add to that, like my parents, when they came here, they had nothing, zero, nothing, like barely, like any, like even shoes. They didn't even have shoes. And when I look at how they built DKs from scratch, I look at how it was just them two as like the workforce. So it's like dad would be in the back baking the donuts, heavy lifting, supplies, whatever. Mom's in the front running around, she's on her feet for so long. And you think about like the ambition of these families, these immigrant families, where they pour so much of their love and their soul into it, and it shows, right? And you think about like what life was like for them before they got here. And my mom tells me stories of like during from 1975 to 1979, like that was when the Khmer Rouge was there. And telling me about, you know I don't know if you guys have ever been to Southeast Asia, but if you have, and you go to like places like Angkor Wat, and you get out of the car, you're going to see these little Cambodian kids who have learned every single language, who are trying to sell you a bracelet, or just like, trying so hard. And, one time I went with my mom, and I don't know if I told you, but in 2018, we actually built a temple together in Cambodia. But we pulled up to, one of the side of the roads, like, a resting stop, and this little girl comes up, and she has all these crazy pastries, and she's like, they're in like little bags, because it's dusty. And so she's like, can you please buy it? And my mom looks at her, and she basically buys all of them. She takes all of them, she puts them in the trunk, she gives them the money, and we drive away. And she goes, I used to be one of those little girls. And so you take that story, right? And then you take the other stories of when they were fleeing, like my mom, she said, they would escape. So they would live literally in the jungle and just walk. And they didn't have anything with them, basic stuff. And they were running out of rice. And so they had heard from another family, like, oh, if you go 20 kilometers east, there's a bunch of bamboo. You can go and get some bamboo and trade it for rice. Because back then they didn't have money. And so, my mom and her brother who passed away during this whole time, runs, like literally runs 20 kilometers to this supposed place of bamboo. And when they get there, there's no bamboo. So she goes over and she knocks on this woman's door. She's like, gets down on her knees and just goes, please, like, I will do anything. Like, do you have any old rice? Like, I will work for you. I just need to, my family is back over there. I can't come back empty handed. Like, we're going to die. Like, please, like, I will do anything. So the next 2 days, this woman has her breaking the rice, making broken rice. And like and then like, her brother's like doing some other like manual labor, and they ended up giving her like pretty much like about like a 25-pound bag's worth of rice to bring back with them. And that basically was enough for them to make it to the border. So you take that story, you take those two stories I just said, then you take stories of like when they were starting to go towards the border, they were caught and they were brought by these Vietnamese soldiers to Cao Dang, I think that's how you
Yeah.
say it, where there's like that huge mountain, and they drop them off, and it's just dead bodies and bombs everywhere. And she like she tells me she held onto my grandma's arm, her mom, and was like, "Are we gonna die here? Like, is this what we're gonna do?" And like just so many other stories of like people being buried alive, like in front of her eyes, like people talking back and then instantly like shooting point blank. And you take all of this, right? And then like the work that they had to do during the Khmer Rouge. And when you apply it to being in America, it's just like, wow, like this is opportunity. And like I get to have freedom. Like this is great. Like it didn't even matter like how tired they were. They were finally working to build their own family and life here.
Well, how is it that we also don't repeat that same pattern, though, of being able to hustle extra hard and not honor rest? I feel like, yeah, I think about my own mother too, who came with nothing. And it's interesting because I do a lot of these like personal development courses. I have a lot of coaches and they talk about the law of attraction and manifestation to get whatever it is you want. And then I just look back at my mom's life, what she has built, and I'm like, oh my gosh, you've been doing it this whole time. But the differences between her and to me is that how is it that I can allow myself to lean more into joy and into pleasure versus thinking that in order for me to create a legacy for myself or live a life of abundance, and not just financially, but emotionally, physically, spiritually, it doesn't mean needing to sacrifice my own well-being. And so I'm curious for you, how is it that you feel what you're doing today is helping to heal your mother and your ancestors?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. And I think like a lot of us kids of immigrants, like we face this balance, right? It's like, okay, when I'm not working, I want to be working. When I'm working, I don't want to be working. But yes, I mean, this is a balance that I still struggle with, and that's completely fine because
Yeah.
I feel like in my soul and my body, it's like I have so much of like my mother's drive ingrained in me, but also I was raised here in America and brought up with these new ideas of like self-care and grounding and like the law of attraction and these things like. So for me, what I do is I try to remind my mom, you know, hey, like I'll whenever we talk on the phone, it's usually like crazy about business or drama, but sometimes I just check in with her. And what I do to really combat that like crazy ambitious drive is like, mom, like patience. And, let's pass the time in doing something like investing in ourselves. I mean, I've tried to show her yoga and some workouts, and she does do her own version of it. And it makes me so proud, because if you were to look at my mom like 10 years ago, she wouldn't do it. She would be very focused on work. So I think that over time, like her realizing like, hey, I can just chill, it also has contributed to her being able to kind of let go of trauma. But that doesn't mean to say like, sometimes we'll eat dinner together or be out somewhere and something will trigger her and she'll tell me one of these tragic stories of her in the Khmer Rouge. And I still feel that there's a lot of trauma that's not healed yet, but we are making progress. And that is enough for me, that we're making progress.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have this misconception that healing is an end destination. And if you listen to my interviews in the past or my story, I believe that healing, there is no destination to it. It is an everyday practice that we return to over and over again. And triggers are just teachers to reveal parts of ourselves that still need that healing. Okay, I'm just curious though, because we talked about food as medicine. You're not having leftovers of donuts for dinner, are you?
No, I don't eat that many donuts because come on, like I can't eat that many donuts. Donuts are also a very special treat for me. But like even like ingrained in like the food I eat, it's like a lot of it has Thai, Chinese, Cambodian influences, and even like encouraging, my mom, like, hey, I don't need like this pile of rice, like like let's try to eat just a little bit of rice and like more veggies and proteins and whatnot. And even that whole conversation of like thinking about like what my ancestors would have thought if I ate less rice, like it's such an interesting shift, because it's like a lot of the times I'm educating my mom like, hey, like did you know this, did you know kale has like vitamin K and like all this stuff, and she gets inspired. Like she'll go to the farmer's market and she'll get a bunch of kale and she's like, look, like I'm like, do you feel better? She's like, yeah. So it's a conversation, with food. It's a conversation.
Prior to us recording this, we were swapping our birth stories, which would have to be for a whole nother podcast because it's something that we're still learning about. How is it that we came into the world, and what are the traditional healing practices that our ancestors did postpartum? And oh, gosh, there's just so much we are unpacking of our parents, how it is we're choosing to show up, how much of our stuff is theirs.
Mhm.
Um, but I would love to know, what is it that you personally are doing to stay grounded in these times? And also, what is it that you are learning to release?
So to stay grounded, and by the way, just really understood what grounding meant not too long ago. So I'm also unpacking and unraveling too. Um,
Unlearning.
Unlearning, yes, retraining, as they say. So to really ground myself, what I do is, obviously it starts with gratitude. So instead of saying I have to do this, it's like I get to do this. And a lot of grounding that I find is in how I talk to myself. And that is something that I have struggled with for a long time. And I still do, to like here and there. And it's really choosing to not listen to that part of you that wants to be negative. You can choose that. You have the power of choice. But people aren't really present that they have that choice. So that's what I do. Um, to really ground myself, I give myself time by myself. And I love people. I love being social. I hate being by myself, but I also have grown to love it. So spending an hour in the bath and making the bath, by the way, like a ceremonial ritual. And like that's something like so new to me, that the last time I took a bath like that, like where I like added, for those of you who are not aware of how to dress up your bath, you add bubbles, you add essential oils, you add Epsom salt, you add, like on the side, I have like stuff for my face, stuff for my eyes, like just like anything that makes you feel like feminine and important, like you throw that in there. But yeah, spending time in the bath too, and like just breathing and just being super present. I mean, I would say meditation, and again, that's also something that I try to get into, and I'm still unpacking that box. It's sometimes it can get the best of me, that like there's just so many things happening I can't get to it. But meditation definitely helps to breathwork classes. Before I would go to Unplug, which is here in LA, and they'd have these guided meditation courses that really grounded me, and doing those also, it creates like a release. Like for some reason, after I go to those meditation classes, I'm literally crying. And that's just because there's so much that I'm holding inside of me, trying to be strong, trying to be perfect. And like when I go and undergo that and put myself in an uncomfortable position, it gets released. And so the things that I am letting go of during this time is, that negative speech that I've has ruled my life for a really long time. Letting go that, I'm Buddhist too. And so like, the Buddha says, with attachment comes great suffering. And so anytime that I'm like so fixated on a certain outcome or solution, I think back and I'm like, you're attached to that. You know what happens when you get attached to that outcome or solution. You're gonna wiggle your way to get there, but it might not serve you in the way that you need to be. Um, I'm also letting go of like people who don't serve me. I mean, that's, all over social media, and like, yeah, I might still be their Instagram friend, but there are some people that make you feel like you are the biggest, brightest star in the entire world. And you need to hold on to those friends. Those friends see your value, they see your kindness, they see your shine. And sometimes you might need them to, like brush up or, blow a little bit. So you're like, oh yeah, this is who I am. This is who I am. And letting go that I have to like know everything. I'm discovering so much about myself with doing these like grounding exercises that, might be physical in a bath, but also could just be like in my brain, like, oh wow, like I'm gonna not choose that today. I'm gonna choose something else, and just bam, I go on. So for those of you who've never practiced grounding or letting go of things, like y'all should try it, because it's really like, we as human beings, as Asian Americans, as women, like we carry so much on our shoulders. Like I feel like my brain goes like a million miles per minute thinking about so many different things. It's time to like keep that up, like keep that up, but also like dedicate some of that time to yourself. Like, what does Maylys want? Not like, what does this person want? Does this person happy? This. And, that has really helped me make more like better sound decisions too. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yes, completely. And actually, Epsom salt baths, I have another guest speaker, Margarita Alcantara, who writes all about what it means to be an empath and how if you are somebody who's highly sensitive, Epsom salt baths help to restore the magnesium, help to release shit that's not yours. So
Yeah.
there's real ritual to that.
And also to add on to that, eliminate all energy vampires right now. Like, stay away from them. Divert. Like, it's just this year I learned what an energy vampire was. My friend actually gave me this book right here,
Yeah.
Empath. I have read like a few chapters, but I'm like, oh my God. Like, I'm like, oh my God, this is me. Like I'm just like reading through it and being like, wow, like I'm so glad I have this book, and I'm like
Yes.
understanding who I am.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I have more recommendations for you. Okay,
Okay.
so if you could envision yourself as a future ancestor, What is it you would say to Maylys, who was still figuring it out? Maybe she was in college, self-medicating, asking, who am I? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? So, what words of wisdom would you drop to her?
I would tell her that, look at your mistakes, welcome your mistakes, because they are not mistakes, they're learning lessons. And also, don't be afraid to ask an expert. There are many times where you're stubborn and you think you know everything. You don't know everything. So let's just, admit that. And really, like, look to the elders who have had that experience before. Ask them the questions that you're wondering instead of making those mistakes and spending money or losing time to make that mistake to learn that lesson. Like, why would you want to do that? Don't you just want the shortcut to the place that you want to go to? Like, ask an expert about it, because you would just save a lot of time, embarrassment, humiliation, all of that stuff. So that's what I would tell her. And, don't be so hard on yourself. It's something I tell myself to this day. I, follow some things on social media, and there's like a image, and if you like look at the image, and then it's like has like shadows, and it's like, like act as if your 3,000 ancestors are like standing behind you, and like that gives me so much power. It gives me so much purpose. I always think about what my parents went through when they were younger in the Khmer Rouge. And I think if they can do that, like I can do anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, a part of my spirituality is also that we worship our ancestors. Like my mom, every day since my grandpa passed away, we have like altars for them. And then we have these days where we celebrate them. So that's Chinese New Year, and what I have nicknamed Chinese Halloween, where the spiritual portal is open and we make a feast. Like people talk about Thanksgiving like it's this big thing. It's like we eat a lot all year round. So we know it's a big table with all, the symbolizations, noodles, meats, fruit, their favorite desserts when they were alive. And then we go in the back and we burn like fake money, fake Rolexes, fake clothes, again as this ritual to honor them, to say like, hey, thank you for standing behind me. Here's some for you too. And having this ancestral spirituality that I've grown up with my entire life, like it just like redefines respect for myself, for my ancestors, and it gives me a lot more purpose to think about and to really be grateful for where I am and where I'm going.
Yeah, and I also want to acknowledge that I feel like all of us had these traditions and these practices, and many of us are right now learning to reclaim it or create rituals of our own to find that connection again. I wanted to bring up one more thing because we're recording this during the midst of a quote unquote pandemic. I say it in quotes because I've just been learning to rephrase it as a retreat, a forced one. But I remember when all the rice was getting sold out everywhere, I went to at least 6 different Asian markets to look for a bag of rice and I couldn't find any. And so then what did I do? I called my parents. I was like, Mom, Dad, I cannot find rice anywhere. We're not going to survive. But they were all like, oh, we have like 100 pounds in the garage. Come by and get it. I mean, it wasn't 100, but it was enough to probably last them for like a year. And I just think back to when growing up, I would think my parents were so weird for buying all of these supplies in bulk, Costco membership. And I'm like, do we really need all of this stuff? And they were ready. They were ready for a time like this to hit because they know what it's like to survive off of very little. And so, granted, I have had rice during this whole period, and I'm so grateful for my parents and their, uh, what do I call it? I
Uh,
guess their
I
their resourcefulness.
I call it being hoarders, because like my mom is the same way. Like if you look in our pantry right now, which I just reorganized, there's a bunch of rice in there. And even as a child, this is that trauma, right? Like that's kind of passed down. It's like I would tell her I like this one snack or this one noodles, and like the next day there's like stacks, like cases, boxes. It's just like there. And I'm just like, now I'm sick of it, but again, like understanding that what happened to our parents is one day, oh, you can't have any of it. You don't have anything. Time to go, like of course they're going to be like that. They want to save it for the rainy day and for occasions when their daughter needs rice, right? They have to be prepared at all times. So, I call them hoarders, and I definitely have inherited some of that trauma, but also am working
Mhm.
on it. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yes, and to also find the medicine amidst what many of us may only perceive as trauma, because our ancestors are hella resilient and creative, and also you embody that. So thank you so much, Maylee, for the legacy it is that you are creating. On the outside it looks like donuts, obviously, but this is so much deeper. So y'all go to DK's Donuts in Santa Monica, watch the documentary, the Donut King film. Have a box of donuts ready, as well as a box of tissues, because you will cry.
Yeah. And watch it with your parents. Watch
Oh
it with
my
your
God.
parents. I urge
Yes.
people to watch it with their parents because it will just shed light on them, maybe remembering their journey, but also you understanding what they went through.
Mhm. So where else can people go to find you? Because your medicine is going to continue evolve, isn't
Yes, it
it?
will. You can definitely find me on Instagram for donut related things at DKS Donuts, at Donut Princess LA. And then my personal one's at Mayley Tao. I also have one for food. It's at Food for the Clout. You can always shoot me a DM, an email, whatever it may be. I'd love to meet you and chat. And I'd love to, feed you some donuts.
Yes. Thank you so much, Maylee. And yeah, I'll see you at the shop.
Okay. Thank you.